Gold and silver have tarnished. And coming live. There we go. The gold and silver have tarnished. And the next phrase is, and their corrosion will be, and then we have underlined, as evidence against you. So, and their corrosion will be as evidence against you. And the phrase as evidence against you is underlined. We start here with the conjunction kai, again, K-A-I. K-A-I means and we follow it by the masculine nominative singular, again, of the articular noun, eos, I-O-S, eos. Neos means poison or venom, as we saw in James 3:8. So it means poison or venom, and we saw that in James 3:8. And then it's extended to mean corrosion. It can mean rust, but we just had the word for rust a second ago, so there are synonyms. We're not going to use rust again. So we have corrosion, the idea being that venom causes your flesh to corrode, or venom causes your nervous system to corrode, if you will. But anyway, it comes to mean corrosion. And again, I've chosen corrosion over rust, once again, because we're not talking about materials that rust. The word has the article, in other words, it has a ha in front of it, which I don't ever bring forward, but probably should start doing that when I say it's articulate. But anyway, it has ha in front of it, followed by the genitive masculine, once again, genitive masculine singular, plural this time, of the third person, as opposed to second person, of the third person personal pronoun, autos. O-U-T-O-S, autos, so it's like autos. And autos means self or same, and then it comes to mean him, her, or them. Therefore, we would have the corrosion of them, or their corrosion. Of course, the corrosion we're talking about is corrosion of the goods. Okay, the corrosion of the gold and the silver. It's becoming evidence that when these things rot, okay, the idea is that this rot is evidence of rot in your soul. Okay? So their corrosion. Then we're going to skip the words here that are a little bit out of place. They're out of place and giving us emphasis, and we have hyperbaton. And instead, we're going to go to the next word, which we expect, which is the verb. And here, we have the future middle indicative of a third person singular verb, I, me, which we've seen many times, the I, me. And I, me means to be. It's the status quo verb. To be is are. And here, it's a future middle, we have will be. Future tense gives us will be. The indicative mood, once again, is the mood of reality, and therefore this truly will be. The third person, not just the third person of their corrosion, of the noun, their corrosion. And of course, the middle tells us that the individuals are receiving rather than generating the action. Okay, so their corrosion will be. And then next we have the words that we skipped. These are going to be underlined. We start with the preposition I.C.E, E-I-S, meaning to or toward. And then when used with as an end result, it comes to mean for or as. And that comes from Bauer, Art, and Danker, number 2291. And then this is followed by the neuter accusative singular of the anarthrous noun, marturion. Marturion, M-A-R-T-U-R-I-O-N. Marturion. Again, it's a neuter accusative singular. And marturion means that which serves as testimony or proof. means evidence. It's obviously in the same word class that we get martyr from. Okay, where an individual becomes evidence. Okay. So we're talking here about evidence, testimony, proof, evidence. When it's used, in kind of in an active sense, it becomes testimony. When an individual is giving evidence, either verbally or written, then it's a testimony. But here it's evidence against you. We could have said evidence or testimony, but it becomes evidence against you, okay, as opposed to a testimony against you. And here with the definite article, we would translate it with an indefinite article. We wouldn't say as a evidence, we just say as evidence. And so we just go ahead and leave it off. Okay. Then finally, we have the locative plural of the second person personal pronoun su, meaning you. Oops, go back. Su, meaning you. And the locative, and of course locative looks just like a dative, but the locative is a case of location. And we have against you. Okay? The idea is, where is this happening? It's happening against you. And the whole phrase is underlined to show emphasis that it receives from hyperbatide. So we have, and their corrosion will be as evidence against you. And next, we have the phrase, and will consume the pieces of your flesh like fire. We have a period. But it doesn't finish our verse, so that's why I have the 3 dots. There's more to our verse. And will consume the pieces of your flesh like fire. Okay? We start, since we have and, we start with what we expect, which is chi, once again. That's interesting. I have a sigma there instead of an alpha. It's supposed to be an alpha there. Written it many times, and I guess my little finger decided not to press, my ring finger pressed. Anyway, K-A-I, and again it's translated simply as and. Then we have, since we have the will consume, we understand this is going to be a future, and it is. We have a future middle indicative, third person singular of the verb. We've seen this before, esthio, E-S-T-H-I-O, esthio. And esthio means literally to eat. So when we talk about eating bread, it's esthio, okay, to eat. But then, of course, it's extended figuratively, meaning to consume. Okay? And with emphasis, it can mean devour or destroy, as if by rust or fire, like we have here in James 5:3, and it's also in Hebrews 10:27. You get this idea, documented in Freeburg, which is another lexicon. Freeburg's electronic lexicon, 11622 is the number there, and Bauer, Art, Gangrick, and Danker is 3152. I use the electronic ones mostly. I'm giving you the electronic numbers as opposed to when Jack used to do it. Remember, he'd give us the column. He'd say the left column or center column, middle, bottom or whatever. Here they do it nice and neat, and they give us numbers associated with each of the words. Okay, so we have the estheo, to consume, and will consume with the future. Okay, then we have the feminine accusative plural. An articular noun. We could almost guess what this one is. This is sarx. S-A-R-X-Z, sarx. Sarx we've seen many times before. It means that material that covers the bones or the flesh. That covers the bones, comma, meaning flesh, not skin. Because the thing that covers the bones and flesh is skin. We're talking about flesh here. And it's also so it's extended to mean physical body with emphasis on the contamination of the old sin nature. And that's actually, we're going to see that's actually the figurative sense that we have here. What we're going to find out is what James is talking about here is a little bit figurative, And he's not talking about it actually consuming your flesh to where all of a sudden you're going to end up being like a leper, these little pieces of your body. When we talk about pieces of your flesh, what we're talking about what we're talking about are things that were acquired in a fleshly manner, meaning outside of the divine dynasty, outside of being filled with the Holy Spirit. Remember when we talk about the fleshly man, okay, and that's the man that's just dichotomous. It's like an individual who's just born with a body and a soul without the human spirit. Right? When we talk about an individual who's out of fellowship, cannot get the things that that are of God, because they need the spiritual perception. Right? We talk about the individual being out of fellowship, being fleshly. Well, these are going to be the things that are acquired by flesh. So what we're talking about here is consuming the pieces of your flesh, or the things that the material things that you've gained, okay, through your fleshly manner. And that's why he's calling them the pieces of your flesh. Okay. So here, what I'm saying, so it's here in the plural we have fleshes, right? Which of course makes little to no sense. We don't talk about consuming your fleshes, okay? Look, I have fleshes. Anyway, what it actually refers to is pieces of flesh, right? That's how we get the plural. So that's how we have the pieces of your flesh, okay? And here with the article, therefore, we have the pieces of your flesh, and of course it's followed by what we'd expect, which is the genitive plural of the second person personal pronoun, su, of you. So we have the fleshes of you, or your fleshes, which turns to the pieces of your flesh. This is really giving me a workout sometimes as to how to bring this into the English. The pieces of your flesh. And then next, we have what's called a comparative participle. And it's hos. H-O-S, hos. And hos means like, as, in such a way, etc. And here it's simply like, representing the manner in which some action is done. And that's what we call in English a simile, which is S-I-M-I-L-E, simile. So when you say pieces of your flesh like fire, okay, that's a simile. As opposed to it's another word, you have simile and you have metaphors. If you want to see the difference between those, you should see the movie Renaissance Man. He has a good example of the difference between similes and metaphors in there. Anyway, it's also a very funny movie if you like Danny DeVito. Anyway. And we will consume the pieces of your flesh like fire. And the fire we have is the neuter nominative singular of an anarthrous noun, por. P-U-R, por. I can't get the roll. Por. I can't get it. Anyway, por. So that's fire. And we end this phrase with a period, but it's not the end of our verse. Okay, but so far altogether we have your gold and silver have tarnished, and their corrosion will be as evidence against you, and will consume the pieces of your flesh like fire. And there's a little bit of textual criticism as to whether the period is here or the period is before the simile. Okay. So there's one translation that has the like fire part on the next piece as opposed to this piece. But if you go back to the more ancient texts have that period here. So it's like fire, period, as opposed to several others say like fire, ... okay, which is what we're going to get next. And it doesn't quite make a lot of sense. Anyway, so altogether here, your gold and silver have tarnished, and the corrosion will be as evidence against you, and will consume the pieces of your flesh like fire. Then the last thing we have is one more sentence to finish verse 3. And the sentence is, you have stored up riches, and riches is in parents with a single line through it, it's not given. It comes down as an ellipsis of repetition. You have stored up riches for the last time, period. A little bit different than the general translators have. They have in the last time. I didn't put it there. Let's see what. All right. Well, my Bible's got so much other stuff in it. Can't get right to it. James' Bible's like about 4 pages. Okay, so they have. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. It's not really talking about in the last days. It's not talking about the idea of the last days associated with like the tribulation or anything like that. It's talking here about the last time. In other words, we'll see in the analysis, but it's actually going to be, they're going to save this all up and it's not going to go with them. Okay, it's the last time that they're going to do this. Okay, the sentence starts with the aorist active, indicative, second person plural. So it's aorist, active, indicative. I'll slow down so if you can write it if you want to. It's aorist, active, indicative, second person plural of the verb thesaurizo. Thesaurizo. That's Thesauridzo. Thesaurizo. It's not a dinosaur, it's spelled the S-A-U-R part. That's what I always think of whenever I see this word. Anyway, thesaurizo. And the word means to keep material safe, by storing it up. To gather, to save, or to store up. Remember, in an agricultural environment, they always had to have silos. There was a growing season and a harvesting season, and you would harvest, right? And you would sow it, right? And then you'd separate it, you would wheat and stuff, and then you would store it up. You would put it into a silo and store it up. It would be the same thing. That's the idea here, is they're storing up riches. They didn't have the banks as we think of banks, right? Or things like that. They had to store it up for themselves. Okay. The aorist gives us the idea of action having been done. The second person plural gives us the concept of you all, and the indicative mood is the mood of reality. So I've included the ellipsis riches as an ellipsis of repetition telling us what has been stored up. So you have stored up riches. Okay? And then this is followed by the preposition in plus the dative, meaning in, within, or on, or if you look up in a lexicon, you'll find about 3 pages worth of definitions. It's sort of like looking up the word to in English. You'll find a lot of different definitions. Here it tells us when, and the best translation we would have would be in. Okay, I'm going to show you how this changes. And then next we have the feminine dative plural of the adjective eschatos. Eschatos, E-S-C-H-A-T-O-S, eschatos, meaning last. Of course, that's where we get the word eschatology, which means the study of the last times or the last days. It's not the only thing anybody studies, sometimes when they become a religious zealot, right? They're all worried about the last days. Ooh, we see certain things happening. That means that, we're in the last days. This is going to happen. Something's going to happen really horrible right now. We can tell we're in the last days. Well, guess what? Nobody knows the day or the hour, right? So nobody knows when the last days are. So we are not in a time of prophecy. Remember, We are not in a period where there's anything that has to happen before our dispensation ends. Okay, so you can't keep looking for it. You can't keep trying to see it and trying to guess. So don't even bother. And that's where a lot of people spend a lot of time doing silly things. Okay, we had an individual in the church here one time that wanted to find out from Jack how many people or how many generations he thought had been from the time of Noah, right? You know, and that way he was going to try and figure out, you know, from the time of Noah until, you know, when the tribulation was going to come, right? And Jack, of course, even told him he was an idiot, shouldn't even worry about that, and he got offended and he left for a while. Okay. Anyway, so don't get caught up in that kind of silliness. Okay. Anyway, so we have the last times, and then finally we have the feminine dative plural of the noun hemera. H-E, it's a long E, M-E-R-A. Hemera. Hemera means day, and since I said plural, it means days. And so literally, we would have in the last days. So it would be you have stored up riches in the last days. But it's actually a phrase that's figurative, and it means for the last time. Okay, not in the last days. James is not talking about, about the tribulation coming. He's not talking about, anything like that. He's talking about in the last days, for the last time, is what that means. So you have stored up riches for the last time. And this indicates that this person has no more days left in which to gather riches. And we understand why, and we'll see it in the analysis. But the idea is that it's the last time he's going to be able to do this, because what's going to happen, he's in soul rot. What does that mean? That means that he is in reversionism. And so as a reversionist, he's getting into deep reversionism. And what's the outcome of deep reversionism? It's the sin unto death. Right? So he's storing these things up, and he's not going to be able to take them with him. Right? And he's storing them up for the last, for the last time, meaning that, they're going to become of no use to him when he undergoes the sin unto death. Nobody lies on their deathbed, one of the classic things, nobody lies on their deathbed and says, gee, if I just accumulated one more thing, right? If I just worked one more day, right? What you're going to see is these individuals are already weeping and crying and wailing, okay? Well, the sin unto death for them is going to be just like the sin unto death for everybody is. It's going to be miserable. It's going to be absolute misery. It's going to be absolute physical and mental. More importantly is the mental part, of course, terror. It's going to be an individual who knows he's going to die, and who's dying in such a way, okay, that it's horrible. And what is his wealth going to do for him at that point? What are all those things around him going to do? Ooh, gee, this comforter is so nice. I'm glad I'm laying into this comforter before I die. Right? No. He should have been getting doctrine. He should have been going out under dying grace. And then when you're under dying grace and you're in the exact same situation, if it's a slow, painful death, okay, the idea is, yes, but all I have to do is sustain him a little bit, and guess what? Then I'm going to be face to face with the Lord. I'm going to be able to have the wonderful above and beyond blessings that He has promised me for functioning properly and becoming a mature believer. Okay? And He's giving me this opportunity to witness, to continue to be an ambassador, to continue to be a priest, to continue to however many more minutes I've got left, I can go ahead and get more doctrine. I've got more time in which to get more information before I check out. Right? And I have more time, I have more opportunity to show individuals the power of God. That's what dying grace is. This individual's not going to have that. This individual's going to be surrounded by his wealth. He's going to be surrounded by his stuff. Probably surrounded by heirs who are just waiting with their feet tapping, waiting for him to kick off. Okay? Thinking about, gee, I wish that person would just die so I could get my inheritance. Right? And so he's not going to be surrounded by loved ones, right? And he's going to be terrified about where he's going, because guess what? He's not going to have the confidence. He's not going to have the information, even as a believer, to know that he's going to be face to face with the Lord. Okay? No more sorrow, no more pain. He's going to be wondering what's going to happen to me when I die, because he doesn't have that information anymore, as opposed to someone who's got dying grace and knows exactly what's going to happen to them and is waiting for it. In fact, as Paul says, running towards it. Okay? You know, one understands that Paul would rather have liked to have stayed dead after he got stomach acid. You know? It's like, gee, I thought my job was done. No, got a little bit more. We're going to bring you back. Dang. Okay. So that's the idea. So for the last time. And therefore, and then this is followed by a period. So we have the end of the sentence there. So we have two sentences in this verse. So far, all together, what we have for verse 3 says, your gold and silver have tarnished, and their corrosion will be as evidence against you, and will consume the pieces of your flesh like fire. You have stored up treasure for the last time, period. Like I say, a couple of the things have, like fire, you have stored up treasure in the last day. Don't understand what that means. Okay. So all together, because I said 2 and 3, go together. In fact, they do, because 2 doesn't finish with a period. So all together we have in verses 2 and 3, your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have tarnished, and their corrosion will be as evidence against you, and will consume the pieces of your flesh like fire, period. You have stored up treasure for the last time. Okay? So we've got what it says. Let's get what it means. Point 1. I don't have these points in the overhead, so you're just going to have to take it. Point 1, verses 2 and 3. Give us the very basic principle that you cannot have blessing beyond your capacity. James uses the example of the reversionistic believer from chapter 4. And continues here to tell us that the wealth they have achieved from neglecting doctrine has rotted as a result of the rot in their soul. This rot manifests the pattern of life of these believers. We aren't all in the divine dynasty all the time, right? If we were, then there would be no need for rebound. There would be no need for the principle of rebound. But because there is a need for the principle of rebound, then we conclude that we need to use it, which means that we're not in the divine dynasty all the time. We all fall out of the divine dynasty. We all succumb to arrogance or hatred, the interlocking system of arrogance or the interlocking system of hatred. We become sorry for ourselves. We have a mental attitude of jealousy, or we have a mental attitude sin of vindictiveness, okay? And those kinds of things. We all have the occasional malfunction, right? We all sin. and therefore we all have to use the rebound technique and get back in the divine time spirit. The idea here is not that he's not talking about these individuals that sin once in a while, right? We all sin once in a while. He's talking about individuals who have chosen this as a pattern of life. Okay, their pattern of life is going after this stuff without concentration on doctrine. And it's getting more and more. It's getting more and more prevalent in society, right? The blue laws are not good laws. Okay, they've never been good laws. They restrict freedom. Okay, for individuals. Individuals should have freedom. Blue laws mean that you can't do anything on Sunday. Okay, but what I'm finding out more and more is that there is no concern for individuals that go to church anymore. Okay, I am constantly invited to work organized golf tournaments. Even though I don't play golf, and I keep telling them I don't play golf, they still invite me. But anyway, I get invited to these, for golf tournaments. Guess when they are? They're always on Sunday, right? There's motorcycle organizations, that go for rides. I'm invited a lot of times to go on rides for the Harley group or whatever. When do they go? They go on Saturdays and Sundays, right? All of these things people tend to stack up on Sunday, right? Well, if you were an individual that decided your happiness was golf or your happiness was fellowship with other motorcycle riders, okay, then you would continually miss Bible class. You would continually miss the opportunity to get doctrine, and you would do these things. Okay? That's the pattern of life that leads to the destruction, leads to the rot. Right? And finally gets to the point where, guess what? You can't enjoy a golf game. You can't enjoy your golf clubs. You can't enjoy your motorcycle. You have these things, but you can't enjoy them because you don't have the capacity anymore. Right? And then, you get struck by lightning on the golf course, or you have a motorcycle accident, or whatever. God shows you the errors of your way. But anyway, the idea is, we're not talking about the individual who does this occasionally. We're talking about a pattern of life. Okay? Point 2. The garments speak not only of literal garments, but are also used figuratively. James is stating that these individuals may be dressed in finery, but they are no better than being dressed in moth-eaten clothes. Their external beauty turns to ugliness when you see the rot in the person's soul. That's easy to see in our day and age because there are quite a few very pretty, have very physical beauty, very pretty female movie stars who have very ugly souls. If you know anything about them and their personal life and the things that they do, and when you see them, on the red carpet or whatever, you may see them in some of the most glorious gowns, but they are still very ugly. They might as well be wearing tissue paper as far as I'm concerned, because you see them and you go, that is an ugly woman in her soul. She may be pretty, she may, and that's the only thing going for her is her physical beauty and the clothes she wears, but she's rotten in her soul, right? And therefore, wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole. Wouldn't touch the 10-foot pole that touched her. Okay? So the idea is there's a lot of that. It's very easy to understand. I could name about 5 of them. I won't. Okay? because I don't want to get sued or anything. But the idea is, you guys, you have enough doctrine. You could probably name a half a dozen yourself. Okay. Point 3. When money became the object of this individual's life, he neglected doctrine. Money is not the object of the evil. The evil is the pattern of life these individuals have chosen by giving up doctrine to acquire the details of life. Remember, you either grow positively or you grow negatively. Therefore, this person started to grow negatively at the moment he chose wealth over doctrine. Point 4. The result of his decision is leading to the rot of his soul. Therefore, he cannot enjoy his wealth or his clothes, and consequently they are as good as rotted. Point 5. The principle is pursue doctrine and your desires will be fulfilled. Pursue your desires to the exclusion of doctrine, while you may have temporary pleasure, they will rot before you. And bring you no happiness. Again, I have a very visual mind, right? And I probably watch too much TV, apparently. I didn't think I watched that much, but then when I think about the examples, I have a lot of TV or movie background, okay? But there was a show on, I don't know if it's still on, I happened to see a couple of the episodes, called Grimm, I guess that was the name of it, right? You know, it was about a descendant of one of the Grimm brothers that wrote the horror stories, right? You know, the children's tales, right? The Brothers Grimm. And in the TV show, the idea was this individual didn't realize it, but he was actually a monster hunter, right? He had to become a monster hunter. That's what his family was. That's how they wrote all these fairy tales and stuff, is because they chased monsters, right? But anyway, what I'm getting to is in the show, what would happen is the individual would see a person, okay, like looking at you, right? He would see a person, but then all of a sudden he would flash to what the person really was. And a lot of times, you know, the person was some kind of internal monster. You know, he could look at you and then see, poof, he'd turn into a werewolf, right? And so he'd know you were a werewolf, okay? Or he'd see you turn into something else they had that could tell you different types of monsters, right? Well, that's kind of what we have here with this rotted wealth. You know, how's this going to fit in? Okay, well, what's going to fit in is we have this idea of this rotted wealth. You and I, okay, can look at the gold, can look at the garments, can see these things, okay, and they may be perfectly good, they may be perfectly normal, right? But we have the ability to also, by listening to the individual, by seeing the person's actions, whatever, to know the rot in their soul. And so then we can see these things and we can see the rot of these things because they're not bringing this individual happiness, right? The old idea of the pig's ear, south silk from the south. Well, anyway, the idea being this stuff that we see it, and people would see it as, gee, that individual is extremely wealthy. He must be really happy, right? Look at all the fine clothes he has. Look at all the money he has, the nice cars that he drives. You know, the house up on the very peak of Camelback or whatever. I don't know if that's still the area where wealthy people go. Now I think it's more Fountain Hills or someplace like that, right? And you go, wow, they've got all of these niceties. They must be really good people, right? But then when you know about them, you learn about them, and you understand and see, they have no doctrine. They have, no capacity for what they have. Then you see the things for what they really are. And then, you're not supposed to feel sorry or have pity, but you can certainly understand and look at that individual and go, it's a shame that it didn't function properly. It could have still had all these things perhaps, if that was God's plan for him, if he had the capability to do it, right? And enjoy it. But now, they can't enjoy it. So you can look at those things and say, yeah, that may be the world's best house, but it's a rotten house. For that individual, it's a rotten house. Their money is rotten, their clothes are rotten, because they're rotten. Right? So just like the grim guy that could look at an individual and see through them and see, the monster inside, we have that capability by listening, by applying our doctrine, by using our doctrine, seeing how they behave, listening to what they say, watching what they do, and realize the monster inside and say, gee, whatever they have is rotten. And guess what? To them, they have the same thing. They may be giving airs of being truly happy, right? And they may have a little bit of limited happiness, but we know from verse 1, okay, that they're going to be wailing, they're going to be crying, okay, they're going to have misery associated with this stuff. So that limited happiness goes away, okay? Point 6. We also understand that the use of the word rot is important. James could have picked other words, and he did, right? We talked about corrosion. We talked about rust or tarnish. But in this case, he starts with rot. That's what he starts with, okay? So rot is important. Continue the point. Rot implies stink. $10 word for that is malodorous. Okay? But I say stink. Okay? Rotting things can be smelled from a distance. Period. You ever had a rotted animal die somewhere close to your house, right? And you got to try and find it because pretty soon your house starts to smell, right? Or you have, where I work, they have these community refrigerators, and some people will leave stuff in there, right? You know, to where they finally have to say, look, this refrigerator on Friday is getting emptied out, and we're throwing everything away, right? Because it stinks. Right, something's in there is rotting. Someone didn't take care of it, didn't do it. It was really bad because we had a period where we had this huge amount of layoffs, right? And people were bringing their lunches in, and they were getting walked out before, and they would forget that that they had a lunch there, right? And we were walking these people out, and nobody was taking care of the refrigerator. And 3 weeks later, it's like, ooh, boy, this room stinks. Oh yeah, it's a refrigerator, right? So rot stinks. Okay, it can be smelled from a distance. Continue the point. Therefore, we, as properly functioning believers, should be able to identify these individuals or this function in ourselves. See, these individuals with a malfunctioning soul, okay, have a rotten smell among them, right? Not literal, of course. You can't go around and go, oh, malfunctioning believer. Okay, right guy. But it is as obvious as a bad smell. Okay? Looking at individuals, seeing their actions, hearing what's coming out of their mouth. You should be able to identify them as easily as you identify a rotten egg. Okay? Continue the point. We know how to avoid it. And if we don't avoid it, then we will smell of rot as well. Remember, bad morals destroy good company. You're not going to be able to take someone who's rotten and in reversionism and pull them back out. The only thing that can pull them back out is them to make the decision that they want themselves to be pulled back out and to get back under the teaching of a properly functioning pastor and get the doctrine that they need to get back out. You are not going to get pulled back out. You're not going to get them back out. Okay. Now you may give them information to where they make the decision themselves. Okay. But the idea is you shouldn't try and say, oh gee, here, let me help you, let me pull you back out, because they are just going to pull you back in. So it's just like you being around the rotted flesh, you're going to end up smelling like rot. And eventually you will rot as well. Right? It's like the bubonic plague, like the black plague. Right? You get close enough to those who are rotting, you're going to rot yourself. So avoid it. Get away from it. You don't want to end up in reversionism yourself. Point 7. There is no reason for rot. We have been promised doctrine and we have been given a place in which to get it. Remember James 1:5? We got that. If any among you lacks wisdom. Okay. Continue the point. We can prevent soul rot and instead develop the capacity to appreciate and enjoy those things that we have or acquire. See, once again, the idea is that what God gives us, He's going to protect, right? And if we continue to function in the divine dynasphere and operate properly as good stewards, see, it's not just that He gives it to us. The thing is, He gives it to us, and we have to continue to grow. We don't stay static. And if we continue to grow, then those things that He gives us, we are going to treat properly. We're going to act as good stewards. And if we act as good stewards, then we are showing our capacity, and we know that God is always going to bless us to the level of that capacity. Proverbs 10:3. So the idea is that He gives us these things. We take care of them. We appreciate them. We use them. Okay? And we do with them as we're supposed to do with them. Why? Because we feel like we have to? No, because we have the doctrine, we have the understanding. We understand that what we're supposed to do with them. And then we are building more and greater capacity, which will be fulfilled. So that's how we get the things that we get to enjoy. The above and beyond blessings in time that are promised to us. And that's how we show capacity for above and beyond blessings in eternity as we become mature, as we pass the tests, maturity tests. Okay? Point 8. In verse 3, the gold and silver represent not only gold and silver coins, but also includes possessions in general. Many things in the ancient world were created out of gold and silver. Some of them everyday things. Such as cups, bowls, plates, utensils, etc. Therefore, this reference refers to the details of life in general. Remember, they had pottery, of course, right? You know, so they made plates and stuff like that out of clay, and you know, things like that, where they had they had pots made out of pottery and plates and things like that made out of pottery. But if you were extremely wealthy, you went past the pottery and you'd have the gold and silver, right? And they didn't have glass per se, right? So you had things like mirrors that were made out of polished metals. Okay, that's what your mirror was made out of. It wasn't made out of silver, silver-plated glass like we have nowadays. Things like that. So when we're talking about gold and silver, we're not just talking about coins. We're not just talking about the things in a sack with a drawstring across the top like people tend to think of when they talk about gold and silver. Point 9. Then the tarnish is not just physical tarnish, but also represents that which is in the soul of the believer. The best foods, on the best golden dishes, and meant to be eaten with the best silverware. Will appear as tarnished. Or rotten. When prepared by or eaten with a reversionistic believer with a soul full of rot. Now let's face it, I think everybody here would rather have a meal on paper plates with plastic forks on a fire in the backyard if you have to, okay, with positively functioning believers and having great fellowship and having a wonderful time, than to go someplace with a reversionistic believer and have some of the finest food on the finest china with the finest utensils, right? And washing it down with the finest wines. Which would you rather have? Personally, I'd rather have beans and tortillas on paper plates with people who are functioning properly than to be confined in some kind of a room with an individual who's malfunctioning, right? Why? Because they're full of rot. And you can't enjoy the meal. Okay? So that's the idea here. The gold and silver, their possessions, aren't worth it. And it's not worth being around the individual that has those possessions. You find so many people that, like we saw in the previous chapter, that are sucking up to the rich guys. Why would you do that? You can't. They don't enjoy what they have. You certainly can't enjoy being around them when they have it. Right? And they didn't have it by giving it away. So trying to suck up and get it by, being their quote entourage so that they'll throw you a bone once in a while, right? Isn't going to happen either. So you're much better off. And we know that for sure. You're much better off functioning properly in the divine dynasty and letting God give you everything that you're supposed to have and being able to enjoy that. Okay, that's where we're going to go ahead and stop. We have a couple more points. We'll pick up at point 10. There's only 5 more points, but we only have a minute left. And we're not going to get through that, obviously. So we'll pick it up there. But it's really, as we can see, it's a really good chapter associated with giving us a really good example of what we should expect, what we should avoid, and what we should see when we're dealing with other individuals. Okay? And so, with that, we're going to go ahead then and close with a song. So if you'll stand, we're going to sing song number 256.